Are live. How we doing, everybody? How we doing, all you amazing Mets fans, especially chiming in here while playoffs are actively going on right now. Yankees, Blue Jays have a heated ALDS matchup after the Yankees came back 5 runs down a night ago. They're trying to keep their playoff hopes alive. The Phillies on the brink of elimination tonight in LA against those Dodgers with Yamamoto on the mound. That's going to be starting soon. And we saw there earlier today a great matchup that continued between Detroit there and the Mariners. Mariners were initially up 3-0, and Detroit just rallied all the way back and had themselves a great run. There's been a lot of awesome baseball that we've seen, and even though the Mets aren't in it, we do have a lot of Mets topics to get into, everybody, for our first official off-season outlook here with my great friend and co-host of the Mets Up podcast. You guys know him, that is James Schiano. James, how are you doing tonight, my guy?
Great, Wardy. What's up, dog?
Guys, if you guys do not know James, please make sure to check out his work first and foremost, because he doesn't just talk about the Mets there with Mark, but he also does fantastic MLB fantasy content there. Just look up James Schiano on YouTube. He has an awesome following there. Make sure to check him out. And tonight, we're really excited because we're going to get into all the aspects of the offseason for this team. And as you guys chime in and hit that like and subscribe button, it's greatly appreciated. And let me know how the audio levels are for you guys as well. They hear James okay and all that great stuff. Thank you so much for that, because tonight, we're not only going to get into James's thoughts and mine further continued as to what is this roster going to be heading into 2026 with the active free agents currently for the Mets pending, as well as potential trade bait. Are they going to part ways with some coveted guys? Are they going to keep these guys? And what is the outlook for them heading into next season when looking at ultimately the areas that they need to upgrade, aspects of the rotation, aspects of the outfield potentially? We're going to look at what they're going to do around second base and a whole lot more. Internal versus external free agent trade targets, you name it. All that fun stuff is what we're breaking down today, guys. So do not hold back from telling us your thoughts, comments, and questions in the live chat. And to our replay viewers, let us know your thoughts in the comments down below as well. And as I promised to each and every one of you guys, we are going to be doing a jersey giveaway tonight. As a further thank you for 35,000 subscribers. You guys know the drill. We do a giveaway after every 1,000 subscriber milestone hit here. We've already given away a bunch of Juan Soto jerseys. I'm curious as to the giveaway winner tonight, what they're going to choose for their player, because I just leave it up to the random subscriber. I'm not going to pick the player, because why not just let them go ahead and pick it? That way it makes it a whole lot easier. So later on in the live show, guys, probably halfway through, and this will be, I'd imagine we're going to be talking a half hour to 40 minutes or so. So expect like 20 minutes in the show or so. We'll be doing the giveaway. So be on the lookout for that, everybody. All you guys got to do is just chime in the live chat. Just comment. That is it. That easy. And thank you guys so much for it. And these guys, let's get into the free agents right here, right now. And I'm going to ask you, basically just yay or nay on bringing these guys back or not. Let's start here. We'll go low, and then we'll find ourselves going high. And I'm not going to talk about Dickie Lovelady as much as I appreciated him, because I do not think he's going to be returning. But honestly, I think you can make a smidge of an argument for someone like Chris Davinsky. Is he someone that you think that David Stearns would say, let's run it back with?
Yeah, I think a lot of those kind of chaos relievers that we ran through a lot last year, I think those guys could all come back if they're willing to pitch back in the same role. Like, I know Chris Davinsky had a minor league contract last season. Now he's out of options because he used it up this year. Are you willing to accept a minor league deal, or are you willing to accept a job in a major league bullpen somewhere else for a team that's maybe less inclined to compete the way we we hope the Mets to compete? Because I don't think I could guarantee Chris Davinsky a job in the major league bullpen to start next year, but I do think he's good enough to be a part of the glob of chaos, I like to call it, the guys that kind of go up and down, those 3 or 4 spots you like to have that are fluid and loose in your bullpen from the get-go. He can be good there. I don't think I want to guarantee him much past that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Chris was good in his limited sample size, but definitely a guy that I think will be like hit or miss as to if we see him return. Brooks Raley, definitely slam dunk to return, not even $5 million on a club option. David Stearns did not hit many things well when it came to hitting home runs heading into the season with acquisitions, but Brooks Raley was one of them, and the Mets lucked out by him still rehabbing back from his reconstructed Tommy John surgery. Raley has been easily one of my favorite relievers the Mets have had. A shout out Billy Big Bucks for trading Kashawn Askew all those years ago. Griffin Canning, we know, had himself a really, really solid first half, was putting up the best numbers of his career as someone who was over 5-year right pitcher and a 170 plus innings, mind you, a year ago for the Angels. So it wasn't like a guy can't handle the workload. And there was an expectation that Canning would be one of the most used pitchers by the Mets this year in various ways. And he was looking solid for the most part up until he ruptured his Achilles. Is Canning someone that you could see the Mets running it back with as someone who definitely thrived here in ways that he didn't thrive with previous organizations?
I sadly think probably not. I really love everything Griffin Canning did for us and think he kind of secretly was a linchpin to this rotation when it was actually a rotation. People were pitching well, but an Achilles in late June, you hope he's even available to pitch by August. And I don't know. I mean, maybe again, you give him like a 2-year, $15 million deal. He rehabs from one, you could pitch him the other. But I think you kind of hope to find a roster filler like Griffin Canning, either among the next batch of prospects coming up or another reclamation project starting pitcher.
Yeah, no, I agree. Canning's definitely one of these replaceable guys, but I feel like if he was willing to come back at right around a similar AAV, the Mets would not be overly opposed to the idea. Because if there's one thing we need, it's definitely more depth, even with currently 8 pitchers under contract heading into next season, which is a lot. So the Mets are definitely locked in there when it comes to a level of talent that they have, but how much do they want to maximize either ace caliber starters or more of those back end types like a Canning, for example? Then you have Ryan Stanek. I think you and I can both probably agree that's done.
We're coming back.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we're comfortable there. As much as I'm sure his wifey's bread was fantastic, that's going to have to go elsewhere. Tyler Rogers, I think it's without a doubt you try to bring him back. I just don't know exactly if the Mets are going to necessarily reach the dollar amount that Tyler will be looking for in the free agent market. What's your thoughts about that?
I honestly don't even know if they entertain that as much as you think they. Like, I think that Tyler Rogers will be like, all right, thanks for your service. We'll see you later, truthfully, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I hope not. As someone who liked Rogers, not only during his time with the Mets, but what he did prior to the Mets, he's been a pretty steady and obviously such an anomaly of a reliever. I love the idea of having a submariner like him, being so contrasting to having a flamethrower, the inning before or after, pumping 100 and 102 like a Helsley, but actually, isn't tipping pitches for north of a month. That'd be fantastic. So Gregory Soto, a guy who started off really good for the Mets, was basically unhittable his first 10 innings, was more than hittable his last 10 innings, no doubt. Yeah, I think we can both say that Soto will not be returning. I'm all for having velocity out of the bullpen from a lefty. That's something the Mets have lacked in recent years, but obviously you would like to find a bit more consistency in what was a pretty inconsistent Gregory Soto down the stretch.
Yeah, bad Gregory Soto. I think we got to a point where that's true. And there aren't a lot of lefties that can give you that kind of velocity. So I think that is why he keeps getting these chances despite consistently poor command. But we'll have AJ Minter back somewhat in that role next season, hopefully, after the big lat injury this year. He had a 2-year deal, so it does seem like he picks up his option to come back. I think that's something we can not bank on, but hope happens.
Oh, absolutely. Here, before we move forward, James, could you do me a favor and maybe unplug and replug your mic? It's just going in and out a little bit, and it might just be a little quick unplug and replug thing.
Yeah, I'll check. Let me see.
Thank you. Shout out Mark in the chat. Hope Mark is doing well. Rosario's crap. What happened with Rosario? Did he have a bad at-bat for the Yanks? I must have missed it. Okay. How are we now, James? Hello? Now I don't hear you, but hold on. We might be able to fix this. I think we'll be able to fix this. Hold on. Because you're in here. I see you in here. Now, do me a favor, James. Maybe just go out and then come back in. Because it was probably because you did it while we were actively doing it. James will be back in 1 second, everybody. Good. I'm glad Mark's keeping you guys entertained in the chat. Steve, how we doing? Great member. Shannon, how you doing? Brad, all you guys. Javier, Sherwin. Thank you guys. Again, everybody chiming in live right now. Be on the lookout because in the next 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to be doing a jersey giveaway to one lucky subscriber. All as a further thank you here for 35,000 subs. I realize that tonight was probably not the most ideal night to be doing a live show with all the playoff games going on, but I told you guys a week ago I would do it on this day, and I really didn't want to deviate away from it, especially for the people who were making sure to chime in today, especially. So know that I appreciate you. Let's see. The Man Bird, how we doing? Steven, Low Nose, how you doing? Mr. Chicken, BG with a $5 holla. Thank you, my guy. He says, sup, Wardy. Need big upgrades defensively, left field, right field, first base, second base. I mean, the Mets are not going to upgrade right field with Juan Soto being there. I don't think they're going to move him to first base or DH just yet, but I understand the need to want to upgrade defensively for this team. I think Stearns makes big changes and want everyone just want to have former Mets be hitting coach. You want it to be a former Met to be hitting coach? Is that what you're telling me? And why? Thank you so much for the donation. I appreciate that. Pick me, Wardy. That's not how it works, but I appreciate the donation nonetheless. All right, let's get James in here. Let's switch this. Bang, boom. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. When I unplugged and replugged, it sounded like you were talking in super slow motion. It was kind of creepy.
That's bizarre. I don't know why. It's one of those things. Your mic is just getting this little static every now and then. So just make sure that you don't like.
I put my sensitivity down.
Okay, I was gonna say don't yell unless it's like a Vladdy bomb that warrants it because Toronto's winning. Okay,
We'll keep
guys.
an eye on that one.
All right, so as we continue, let's go on from talking about we had Tyler Rogers, Gregory Soto. An obvious one that will not be returning, even though I love him and the vibes, is Jesse Winker. Sadly, Carlos Mendoza just did not get the clue that a guy who hasn't played left field in at least a year felt like. Shouldn't have thrown him in there in that doubleheader against the Cardinals. One play, and that's all it took there. And that was literally the last we saw of him all year long. Any closing remarks in regards to Jesse Winker's tenure as a New York Met?
I mean, it is funny looking back how loved Jesse Winker was when his stats as a Met were pretty bad, literally besides for that Philly series, but which is exactly what we need him for. I just think he, again, represents something the Mets have had too much of on this past roster, which was guys that could not play defense.
Right.
Like you need more players that can play good defense on the Major League Baseball team. And he was, again, love the vibes, love the at-bats he takes. You need more athletes on a baseball team now.
I think not only athletes, but if there's one quality that he brought that the Mets severely missed this year, really was that kind of, no-nonsense mentality and brought that, that moxie to a team that clearly had it missed one way or another that we saw this past year. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. They need to do a better job moving forward on bringing in guys that if they are going to be, maybe not great defensively, they're not to the point of basically being a standalone DH, having multiple on the roster. But when it comes to the vibes and what he was able to bring beyond just the play is something that I hope the Mets can try to find, if not internally, then somewhere externally this offseason. And Ryan Helsley's a guy that is not going to be returning this Mets team unless somehow, some way, Edwin Diaz walks and does not come back. And Helsley feels that he actually could thrive in this market as a closer. It's the only way I could see it making sense. Otherwise, I don't see a world where the Mets even consider throwing Helsley closer money that he's going to be demanding. What's your thoughts?
No, I think no way. I don't even know if he can demand closer money after everything that just happened. Like, I think he's going to have to do a reclamation project contract. I'm really curious about him and Devin Williams as free agents this year. Not that either of them will have anything to do with the Mets, but they're both just fascinating cases of relievers who have been elite for a really extended period of time, but things just went really, really bad. I still think Helsley finds a place next year and is successful. I just don't think he gets that chance here, and I really don't blame David Stearns at all for probably just like hating him.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're wrong, especially with how much Helsley cost us that first month. It was actually ridiculous. And speaking of costing the Mets, they didn't give up much for him, but it still was more than enough, and that was Cedric Mullins, who batted, basically the Mendoza line, not even with the Mets during his tenure here. Not returning, no doubt about it. I'm just curious to see where Mullins is going to land because he's more than likely not going back to Baltimore, but could be a veteran that thrives well as maybe, a fourth outfielder / platoon type facing lefties and actually being utilized against lefties, something Carlos Mendoza decided not to do a lot of the times after we acquired him. Not exactly sure why that was for a guy who had great reverse splits this year. But Cedric Mullins, any thoughts there? I think that's about that.
I feel like Cedric Mullins catches on with like the White Sox and has a nice, okay, bad season.
Right. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Next, AJ Minter, who will be returning because he's got that player option and, $11 million. I think he's going to take that, especially knowing that he's rehabbing that completely torn labrum, which was crazy. But the good news is that we will hopefully get to see Minter be what, we were anticipating to see. Him paired with now Raley, which could be a great 1-2 punch of a lefty tandem in this bullpen. You're not necessarily getting velocity from these guys, but you're getting guys that certainly have a really good swing and miss. And Mentor's had a lot of success against both righties and lefties that we've seen over the past half decade there, has helped out the Braves a lot in some of their key playoff runs. Frankie Montas, unfortunately.
He's back.
He's back. We know he's back. But I guess the question with Frankie Montas is, we know he's not going to pitch at all for the Mets in 2026. Is he someone that the Mets decide to run it back with after the fact while he's rehabbing all year long in the organization and on their diet plan and on their regimen of exactly what they're trying to morph him to be?
Yeah, I really don't know. There's another situation where I'm sure this is the one big move that David Stearns would love to have back because of both the injuries and the ineffectiveness. But at the end of the day, if he still throws 96, 97 miles per hour, he probably signs somewhere. I don't think it'll be with us, but he will find a job somewhere.
Right. No, I agree with that. Starling Marte is a guy that, some people are heavily advocating to return because according to Juan Soto, he's the captain of this team, and we know how much Juan appreciates Marte. But I guess my question is, does Juan Soto need a Marte to have success? No, he doesn't. This was his first year actually playing with him. So knowing Marte provided plenty for the Mets in a limited role, but also knowing that he really does not provide much defensively now is, a guy that feels like he's just another somewhat decent injury away from missing an entire half season. Nothing personal against Marte, but that was a contract that aged like milk from really when it first happened after that first season. I would say that the Mets have come to their Starling Marte end. What do you think?
I think so as well. Very happy with Marte was able to give us this year, but it's that same kind of concept with this roster. Like, how many guys can you keep on this team that don't offer you any defense or athleticism? I know Marte used to be fast. It used to be his thing, but he's definitely not that guy anymore. Kind of feels like he's running quicksand half the time.
Right.
And there's no defense. There's no power. There's no play discipline. That's just not – you have to give more than that if you're going to be a player that warrants a contract. Because while we do kind of have unlimited money as the Mets this era, you don't have unlimited roster spots. If someone's taking a roster spot, that's taking a potential roster spot from somebody else. So you have to be able to maximize those, and that's something the Mets did poorly this season, very poorly.
Oh, they absolutely did. And Starling Marte was one of those guys that, as I said, heading into the season, could bat 280 in his sleep, and he essentially did that yet again. So give credit where credit's due. Very strong contact hitter. But when the Mets were, missing out on Mark Vientos' production the first half of the year, Marte was solid, but we need some form of power and consistency in DH. And I personally have been fed up with the notion that, we have to continue this platoon split option of, not even getting a total of 20 home runs out of that position, or at best, when you look at what you're seeing with teams like the Phillies and Kyle Schwarber, Shohei and the Dodgers and other big teams there in the National League, there's no proper excuse not to be at least getting 30, 35, 40 home runs a year out of that DH position. There is a talent out there. I think it's time for the Mets to actually prioritize that. Before expanding more in depth as to like the external options there, what's your thoughts about the Mets' previous philosophy with DH and what you would like moving forward?
I still like keeping the DH relatively open. Like, you look at DHs in the league this year, only 7 of them got over 500 plate appearances while they were a designated hitter. And you think about the names there. Yandy Diaz got 496, so I'll include him in that. So Yandy Diaz, Andrew McCutchen, very old. Christian Yelich, back doesn't work. Brent Rooker, can't play the field. Marcell Ozuna, bad guy. And the Devers can't play the field. Schwarber can't play the field. Shohei can't play the field. And the Mets just kind of are stuck with too many not play the field guys in this roster still to go out and get a dedicated DH. Because to get a dedicated DH, you have to either pick a player who's in the field and say he's not going to be a defensive player anymore because you're not good enough there. So maybe that is just Pete Alonso. Like, maybe that's just something they do as, again, David Stearns goes in his pursuit for run prevention this offseason. Maybe that's how we kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Like, he becomes the DH. You have one of the best DHs in the league now all of a sudden, and you can get a first baseman that we consider a plus defender when we know how Pete has struggled there.
If the Mets do, in fact, go down that route, I'll be ecstatic that Alonso accepted it, because I don't really see a world where the Mets sign and bring back Alonso in the circumstance that it would be along the lines of what he would want probably for his value, meaning that if he signed with the Mets and went to DH, is he going to be on a long-term contract? Probably not. He's probably going to be on a similar structure to what he's currently out with. Player opt-outs, I'm sure, but with the pending CBA a year from now, there's a lot of uncertainty as to what the contract status for players are going to be moving forward. And I think for that reason, along with what he already went through with the Mets, I do not see a world where he's like, okay, now I'm going to accept DH. I feel like he would have done that already over the past couple years when the Mets have toyed with the idea of throwing him there because, let's face it, Alonso, great guy. He can be solid at times at first, but by no means a guy that you can consistently rely on there defensively. He's been a liability.
And like you can, but you just know it'll make your overall team defense worse. Which if you have really great team defense, you can afford one or two guys on the diamond that aren't that. But the Mets just don't have good team defense. So I do still think they're going to go into next season with more of a rotating door at DH just to get guys some days off and also just to alleviate the Juan Soto days in the field because he is very bad there as well. And if you bring Pete back, the Pete days in the field. But I think that I can't see the Mets heading into this offseason, especially based on some of the guys available who could potentially fill that role, being like, yes, here's our every single day DH. I don't know if I see that in the future, in the near future.
Yeah, so we're going to talk more about it, especially when we get into guys like Schwarber, for example, Vientos, if he actually stays versus if he's dealt, how do the Mets go about maximizing that position? I don't hate the idea, and I see where you're coming from and wanting a little bit of an opening for that position still for roster flexibility. My counter to that is how much has that roster flexibility necessarily, been a game changer for the Mets over the past couple years?
Much.
And that's where I would like them to actually make a difference there if they're going to stay true to it, basically, because they haven't even fared well in their own philosophy. That's the main thing. When you started in 2022 with Darren Ruff and Daniel Vogelbach, you had your flash for the first month, and then that quickly died out. Then you look at, even when you look at 2021, for example, well, I shouldn't say 2021, but the only time the Mets really succeeded with the DH position, in my honest opinion, is when they had it in the shortened 2020 season. That was the last time I felt like the Mets actually completely took advantage of DH, power galore between getting Alonso and Dom Smith consistently in there, JD Davis getting his at bats. There was a lot to balance there, and the ball was flying in that short season for them. But speaking of the ball flying, Alonso, the home run leader of this New York Mets team, insane to say. Feels like yesterday I was in attendance for his first ever home run at Citi Field. I can't believe it hasn't been that long ago, but we're already 6-7 years removed, as crazy as that sounds. And, he's entering his age 31 season. He's looking for a nice payday, rightfully so. He's going to be looking for at least, $30 million AAV, if not more. Do you think Alonso is going to return to the Mets as we talk today? Because I know that this is an opinion that may very well change and vary depending on how lengthy of an offseason we have with him.
I still tend to think yes. I think that just kind of like what David Stern said, Pete's a great Met, and we think he's a great Met. There is also parts of me that I can't really shake where it's like the Mets at some point we kind of might have to, I don't mean this about Pete, but just the greater organization. We just shed a bunch of coaches, and a lot of these coaches that we shed came from regimes that spanned all the way back to Sandy Alderson. Talk about the first time Glenn Sherlock was on this bench. And we still have a lot of the same core that has kind of gone through their entire arbitration process, early career contract process, and won nothing with McNeil, Nimmo, Pete kind of at the center of it. So I think there is a chance that none of those guys are back next year, but there's a chance. I guess 2 or 3 of them are back. But I want Pete back, but I will not be surprised if it goes another direction. I still want and think he is back.
I want Alonso back too. I think Alonso's likelihood of not coming back is greater than it's ever been, between not having the QO attached in this time around and knowing that with that uncertainty with the CBA a year from now, I wonder how teams approach things differently. Not that there's a massive need across the board for first baseman for every single contending team, but
not much at all.
You also have to wonder, does Alonso change his viewpoint on what he's willing to do? Does he now say, I'm going to try to increase my market value by making myself known as a DH option? If that is something that could help him now. I don't think it'll help him long term, but at the same time, how much more is he really going to help himself with his lack of defensive value right now long term? I feel like he's only going to continue to lose money the way that he's been playing the last couple of years there. So I think there's definitely a good argument to be had where can Alonso get an eerily similar structured contract to what he had this time around with the Mets? Yeah, it's definitely possible. But I think to your point, there's a greater worry or concern that there could be a team that maybe really goes out there and sways him to maybe be more willing to do DH versus the Mets somehow, some way. I'm not sure how a team can sway Alonso away, but maybe it also could just be a change of scenery thing. Maybe he wants a change of scenery and we are unaware of it right now. He feels like a guy that wants to stay a Met, through and through until the bitter end. Not the exact same vibe we had with a guy like Jacob deGrom, obviously. But I'm curious to hear from you as to if you think Alonso is going to be the one to completely prioritize the bag this offseason when looking at the length of the contract, or if he will be more of the appetite of running back with the Mets as long as he's really getting just the AAV he wants. If he gets AAV and player control of a contract, how much is he really doing at fall?
I think definitely he's going to try and get the longest deal he can, which I think he tried last year. He was coming off the worst year of his career, the 2 worst years of his career, so it was kind of difficult to do. But I think every player should try to get as much money as they can. Like, they have such a short window to earn these incredible amounts of money. Like, you have to give it a shot. Like, Pete is 30 right now. He'll be 31 next season. Like, you're not going to have many more bites at the apple to possibly get a long-term deal. But also at the same time, like what you were saying, it's not really a secret how bad Pete Alonso is at first base. Like, these teams know how much he struggles defensively. Everyone is very aware of this. And while he is...
You even had Zach Scott saying he's terrible on X like 2 days ago, just nonchalant at defense.
Well, he loves to say anything on X, but I think it's just the kind of situation where it's not a secret. So it's like it's almost kind of like any team will come to Alonso being like, hey, we're willing to give you this amount of money for this amount of years. And they'll probably all be very similar across all the teams because these teams like soft collude for every contract. Basically, they'll mostly think exactly the same way. But no matter what, he probably has to accept some kind of regular DHing in this contract, because the reason he doesn't want to do it is because once you leave the field, you get paid as a DH. You get paid for both sides of the ball. If you're not playing one side of the ball, you're going to make less money.
Right.
And I think that's why he doesn't get the contracts he wants anyway. And that's why he didn't get them last season. So he might not get them again this season. So I do think that just something that will continue. And I think he also probably knows, maybe it's a pride thing for him too. It's probably a tough thing to come to terms with, where you don't want to not be good enough to do something you've been doing your whole life. So for that, I had to have that conversation to be like, you're not playing the field anymore. That's tough to understand. But at the same time, we've also heard Pete talk about his own game-to-game struggles for being a DH, finding the ways to kind of stay active, stay mentally involved in the game. That's also a big hurdle to get over. Not saying he can't do it, because I think he definitely can. He's still one of the 15 or so best hitters in all of baseball, 20. But that's probably something that he's going to have to come to grips with a bit as this offseason moves on.
Yeah, I feel like if he was signing up from the start of the season to say, all right, I'm going to be full-time DH, he would get adjusted to it. But in the point of what we've seen to this point throughout previous seasons, he just has not been that guy where mentally he's been there every single time, because we've seen Alonso lost in great stretches throughout the season as is. That's another one he's lost because he has a lack of feel for the game, because he's not getting his defensive reps like he usually does. Because when you're in such a continued routine for as long as he's been as a player, that is not an easy band-aid to just rip off and do something abruptly different, moving forward and expect to have the same success. You think on paper, a batter like Alonso should be able to smoothly transition and be one of the best DHs in the game. I think he really can be, but we have to actually see him do that first. And if he does do that, then look out, world, because Alonso feels like the type that could age all the way until, his late 30s, early 40s and still be one of the best sluggers in baseball. Where I have a concern, I'm sure you may find yourself in the same category, is with the way he throws his body out there defensively. How much more of a beating will his body be able to take comfortably before we finally find, he has a tweak and he's out 2 to 4 weeks, or this happened and then he's out 2 months. Like, not that I wish it, I'm just saying no first baseman throws their body out there for the most part the way that Alonso does in today's game. And how much more is that sustainable, I guess, is my question.
It's even sustainable of the fact of, again, like how bad of a defender he is. Like, Pete Alonso plays baseball kind of like a kid sometimes. And I love that about him, because he loves playing baseball.
He's a goofy man. He really is.
He ends every single game with the dirtiest jersey on the field. I think you need guys like that in your team. That's a beautiful thing. But I was having this conversation today with a friend about the difference between, we were just watching both the baseball games at the same time. Like watching Pete Armstrong go after a ball in center field versus we watched Randy Rosarena really misplay a ball in left. And it's just like, when you're a good fielder, you don't really have to get dirty as much. You still get dirty for those miracle plays, but if you can get around the ball and get to everything and actually have real range and lateral quickness, then you're there. You're on top of it. I think Pete sometimes gets dirty because he feels like he wants to make those spectacular plays to make up for some of the simple ones he maybe can't make. And maybe there is a world where, like, again, you can kind of thread this needle and you tell Pete, you're the 75% DH, you're getting 25% reps at first base, and you bring in a Ryan O'Hearn, a lefty with a good glove, a Josh Naylor, a lefty with a more passable glove than Pete. Like, 'cause those are all the other first base options that you're actually getting a glove upgrade. Like maybe that is something that the Mets consider. But I do think we're a long way away from having those decisions be made.
Yeah, and it's a lengthy offseason, no doubt. I hope that we don't get ourselves all the way to February and at Amazing Day again and heckling Steve Cohen as to where is Pete Alonso, just for him to have his knee-jerk reaction, which I will say I was there. I wasn't actively in the room when it first happened. I was right outside of it, and then everything was blowing up on X. I was like, what happened? I'm like, oh, that was Steve's remarks. He was being straightforward with everybody. I'm like, listen, everyone, if you're going to hound the owner, what's going on with a player when the owner himself clearly wants the player to return, it just hasn't happened yet, you're going to get him to be a straight shooter the way that he was. And we got one final player in here, and that is Mr. Edwin Diaz, when evaluating the free agents. And Diaz has already said to the media, James, that even if he opts out, he obviously wants to return. This is a place that he wants to be at. My big qualm with someone like Diaz heading the offseason was, and I know you're always going to do what's best for your family and just continue to secure your bag as a player. I understand that. And I know that the idea of sympathizing or, kind of favoring, a 20-plus net worth billionaire and Steve Cohen sounds silly. But from a fan point of view, to see Edwin Diaz get a record-breaking contract as is by Steve Cohen, and then to blow his knee right before the start of the first year of that contract and have Steve take care of him the way that he did.
Yeah.
I find the notion of looking for like the biggest long-term bag that we know the Mets will not give to Diaz, a smack in the face to Steve Cohen, personally. And that may be completely off base, but that's how I feel knowing how much the Mets have already invested in him. If that wasn't the case, if it wasn't a record-breaking contract, I wouldn't even be having this kind of conversation with you. But because of that, it really has me thinking, how far do the Mets go, especially with David Stearns, who is most certainly not a Billy Epler type mind, but saw the past few years just how valuable and how important run prevention is, and you really shouldn't look any further as a reliever than Edwin Diaz. Now, how much do you value those walk years in 2022 and 2025 versus what you're going to get in potentially 2026, 2027? How much is that really an X factor for relievers who can be roller coasters at times? So I want to hear from you. One, do you think Diaz will return or not? And two, how far do you expect the Mets to go for him? Because when you see a contract like Tanner Scott, just how far are we going to really push this envelope?
In my heart of hearts, I do think he's back. And I think the Mets actually do have a good bit of leverage here just based on the fact that when Diaz signed his extension last time with Billy Epler after the 2022 season, he signed in the period before free agency actually began. So it was kind of like a re-signing where he never actually reached the market. Because that happened, we never even had the opportunity or the need to offer Edwin Diaz the qualifying offer. I think this offseason, if we do get past that window and he's still unsigned, which is definitely possible, you can set the qualifying offer and have that hang over Edwin Diaz's head. So now any team that signs him, you get a draft pick back. That really dissuades teams from signing free agents. So I do think that having that bit of leverage and knowing that there's a 1 year, $20 million offer there, I think you probably just wind up almost giving him the exact same deal that you gave him last time, a very close to a 4 for 100, 4 for 80, I think it was at the time, 4 for 82, 4 for 79, but basically $20 million a year. Maybe you give him a couple more AAV on that so he can maintain the highest paid closer in baseball moniker that he definitely earned, he definitely deserves. But and him at 31 years old, this is the last huge payday. And he's also a reliever that we saw the velocity tick down a tad this year. It went from a guy that sat over 98 miles an hour to a guy that was now right around 97. And Diaz being just a two-pitch pitcher, you worry a bit if that velocity continues to trickle down with the effects of aging taking place. But I don't really think there's much of a doubt that he deserves to be paid like the best reliever in baseball. And I think that the market and Steve Cohen, David Stearns, Diaz, everyone will come together and make a deal that is fair and at market value while also, again, getting him what he's due.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I hope that David Stearns doesn't necessarily, bend over backwards for Diaz if Diaz really gets greedy in this somehow, some way. But to your point, if it is in a similar structure to what we have done, another, say, 3-4 years, get creative with the options, I'm not at all opposed to that. I do hope the Mets obviously bring Diaz back because we're still at a peak prime with this core group when looking at Lindor, Nimmo, hopefully a return of Alonso. If you don't trade Nimmo, at least Soto, who looks like just an absolute demon. I mean, I can't say enough great things about Soto's first year as a New York Met. Arguably the best that we've ever seen in this franchise's history already. The Mets have a core to a degree to build around still, but I would say that the foundation isn't nearly as structured as what we initially thought, especially when you look at the abundance of riches, you could say, in the infield options. As we stated, they haven't all necessarily established themselves there, and they aren't getting any younger. And it's kind of, you need to put up or shut up time for some of these guys if they're at all going to be part of the organization moving forward. So when we talk about those infield options and some other pieces that could be traded by this Mets team, in more of a rapid-fire fashion, I got to ask you here, when looking at Brett Baty, Mark Vientos, Luis Angel Acuna, and Ronnie Mauricio, right away, without even second-guessing it, who do you think is staying versus leaving?
I think Beatty's staying. I think Beatty's the third baseman next year on opening day. I think Mark Vientos is traded just because, again, while he was a hero for us and while he did so many great things 2024 run, you just have to be able to do more things to help the baseball team. If he's not maintaining like a 900 OPS, a 35 homer pace against left-handed pitching, I don't know what else he can do to help the team. So I think he's gone. Mauricio is interesting. The Mets were really cute towards the end of the season with keeping Mauricio on this roster. We're all like, why are the Mets keeping Mauricio on this roster? Why is Mauricio on this roster and never playing? It was simply just to preserve his options. So next year he can go back to the minor leagues and come up freely, whether it be for us or someone else. I think there was a good piece of that to preserve his trade value. And then I think you wind up probably keeping Luis Angel Acuna because you did burn his option year this year. And he kind of becomes that maybe just playing against lefties for Brett Baty just as a glove speed guy, third base infield type.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in with you on that. I'm curious to see between Mauricio and Acuna who the Mets view has more value in the organization, because the Mets went out of their way to not send Mauricio down to make sure he still had that final, option on his contract. But at the same time, Acuna has provided, value to them in stints as well. I think Mauricio brings potentially more to the table in his actual raw ability if they can maximize it. But one thing, and this is, I think I said this to even you in the past, they need to go the Cedric Mullins approach with Ronnie Mauricio, and you need to take him away from being a switch hitter. There's just no reason for this, okay? Make him a full-time lefty hitter, and even if that means he's a bit more platoon, okay, because he might be able to really maximize himself as a hitter in that way. So I think that's the route the Mets should go down. Acuna feels more susceptible to being traded between those two. And yes, Vientos, I don't got a qualm with Vientos at all. No problem with him whatsoever, but I don't think that the Mets really have much of a fit for him moving forward, or they're going to be stuck in this same logjam and carousel where you're going to have Carlos Mendoza feeling inclined to put Vientos at third again because you're going to want to maximize the offense's output. But what if the offense, one, doesn't show up, and two, the defense doesn't either? That's where you're really putting yourself in a hole like you did at points throughout this past season. So those among the infielders, I think we're in agreement on. So then let's get into the veterans. Brandon Nimmo, you say the Mets are going to try to trade. The problem is Brandon Nimmo's got a full no trade. So I really don't see a world where that happens unless they basically give Nimmo a treatment that we wouldn't have seen unless this was like the Will Ponzian regime. And I don't really know they're going to stoop that low. But when you look at Brandon Nimmo, we have Jeff McNeil. That's another man who's been here for a long period of time now. Jeff is obviously owed just under $16 million. He has a 2027 club option, but a $2 million buyout. This feels like peak prime time to trade McNeil, who actually has a level of trade value since his batting champ season in 2022. I know that it feels like we talk about Jeff being dealt every single offseason each of the past 3.5 years, because that's true. But there has been some valid reasons each and every year that has led us to this point. And while I appreciate what he did this year, because I really thought McNeil was a man of his word from a year ago and said, I need to stop being the singles hitter. I really need to be more gap to gap and focus on my, power ability. And he actually did that. And it boded well. He wasn't a guy that was constantly flying on the warning track, as he was actually providing more quality at bats and looking more like the Jeff of old. But speaking of Jeff, he is not getting any younger. He is getting older. He's entering his age 34 season. How healthy is he going to be balancing center field, second base? And on top of it, do the Mets want another year of a logjam where they basically don't have a spot to even consider a top prospect in a Jet Williams, unless they really have the appetite to trade someone like him? So what's your thoughts about McNeil and the Mets potentially partying with him this offseason?
I still think the Mets it's going to be funny talking about these two names together, Jet and Jeff, but I think the Mets like Jet, but understand he's probably not precisely ready yet. But I think he gives them a lot of what they want more so from this team, which is speed and defense.
Right.
But at the same time, Jeff, he still plays a good defensive second base, and he really helped them along the outfield this year. He's not a tremendously good outfielder.
He was our best
anymore.
center fielder, you could argue still.
Yeah, probably. And, but like, I think again, listen to trying to parse through all the David Stearns hieroglyphics there, like the run prevention. Like Tyrone Taylor's still a monster defensively in center field, but Jeff to me is just a guy that you might have to trade just to turn the page on this roster a little bit. You know, just get rid of the stench. Like there's a group of players that have failed a lot together. You might just need new, fresh blood in that room. And I do think that we're not that far away from our next crop of prospects coming up. I think Carson Bench will be ready nearly for opening day. I think they want that. I think Jet, if he has a good month to start the season or a tremendously good spring training, he could force someone's hand. I think Ryan Clifford's in that same boat. Like I think you have the next wave closer than some fans may think, but I think at the same time you have to clear clutter on the major league roster like we're talking about now to do it. So if you had to tell me yes or no 100% for Jeff McNeil, I would probably honestly guess no, he's not on the roster on opening day.
And, you know, not only them, you think of Jacob Reimer, who really blossomed as, you know, basically in the Mets hit lab this past year. You think of A.J. Ewing as someone who just completely skyrocketed this past year. Got a lot of trade interest at the deadline that thankfully the Mets said, no, thank you. We want this kid. 70 stolen bags, was a demon. Only got better throughout the year when he got moved up, in similarity to Bench for the most part. And Bench finished his season strong, had a couple bombs in that series right around me here in the Lehigh Valley against the Iron Pigs. I'm really bullish on Bench. He's easily my favorite prospect the Mets have had in the minute now. He looks so polished. He reminds me a lot of a guy who is going to really look in similarity to how he did in college. And I think the benefit by being an OSU kid was not only being the teammates of McLean, but also someone who understands kind of how to play more at a level that is, I think, an easier transition to the major leagues than necessarily what you're getting when you're drafting kids out of high school and have a little bit more development. Like Colin Houck, for example, he's had a little bit of a slow roll since Epler drafted. Crazy. Epler nailed the 2023 draft, but his first pick was one of the most underwhelming to this point, as crazy as that is to say. But the last couple of guys I want to talk about with you before we get on to, some external options for this Mets team, taking a look at the biggest needs for this club before we're wrapping up and we're going to do our jersey giveaway, is a rotation. And the Mets have an abundance of pitchers under contract right now. And you could even make an argument that the Mets should trade away some of these pitchers of youth when looking at starting, because maybe they can add more of a star ace caliber pitcher now for that. That may happen. We'll see. In the meantime, you have not only Christian Scott, who I'm really excited to see him hopefully in a full season with this team. You're going to pair him with Brandon Sproat, hopefully as long as Sproat is here, the Florida boys. Then you're going to add Noel McLean. You're going to have Jonathan. And then you get on to the Clay Holmeses, who I think we can all agree deserves to be starting this rotation to begin next year. I mean, literally, 100%. He was our most reliable starter this year, as crazy as that is to say. That is the truth. You pair that with David Peterson. If the Mets don't trade him, I want to know your thoughts on him. Kodai Senga, there's a lot of uncertainty, of course. And, I'm trying to think if there's one more veteran, Sean Manaea. Sean, huge uncertainty with, because maybe he's not going to get elbow surgery on the loose body. I don't know how I feel about that. Sometimes maybe we should just go with what they initially suggested. So to kind of go out of the mix of all those pitchers, out of the 8 the Mets have under contract that will impact us, because McGill's going to be on the shelf all year, obviously. Who out of that group, if any, do you think the Mets should consider dealing, and why?
I truthfully don't think any of those guys get dealt. I think the one with the highest chance of being dealt is probably David Peterson. But if you're trying to be a winning team in Major League Baseball, innings are the most difficult thing to come by. We saw it this year. Like, this Mets team just didn't have enough innings on this roster.
Right.
If you didn't have enough innings this year, unless you go out and sign 5-8 starting pitchers, which I don't know if they're going to do, because we can even run through some of the free agent names available and how uninspiring they are. You just can't get rid of innings. Even if a guy's unspectacular, like, the innings are so monumentally valuable. I think the Mets learned that firsthand this year. If there winds up being a trade and it's for some kind of ace level pitcher, maybe some kind of Ketel Marte situation, I think then you could see some of the younger guys get dealt. I don't think McLean or Tom are going anywhere. I think Sproat is someone the Mets would be willing to deal, but also at the same time, he's not like a blue chipper like the other two. He's not like the centerpiece of a trade for a star. He's more of a piece in a trade for a star, or
right.
A guy you trade for a veteran that maybe only has 1 year of control left. You're giving up 6 years of control for 1 year of control for what you think is a huge talent upgrade. So if I had to guess anyone from this group gets traded, I'd say him, but I really don't think any. I think all of these guys are back under contract with this team next year.
Yeah, I think the only way a guy like Sproat gets dealt is if they really get blown away by, a blockbuster deal that's going to really move the needle for them next season and beyond. Because if, say, they did that for a starter, which I'll just say flat out, if they traded for Joe Ryan, I would not be opposed to that. Now, my counter is what happens if, God forbid, say you trade for an ace caliber either like Ryan or maybe someone a little bit less, and they don't transition well to the Mets. It's a Ryan Helsley situation. Just things don't work right for one reason or another. And then Sproat goes out and dominates, provides length, and looks exactly like what you saw flashes of. But Mendy, of course, had a quick pull with him in the final starts of the year because whether it was velocity issues, as he so-called claimed, or because of, he couldn't get out of his own mess, apparently. I think Brandon would have done a solid job in some of those final outings versus what his final line suggested that they were. I really was impressed with Sproat far more than I think I was expecting to be when he got the call by the Mets. Like, he really looked like a guy who knew exactly what he was doing up there. Yes, he was susceptible to getting hit, especially second, then third time in the order, which is why he got pulled at 70 pitches, those back-to-back starts. But I think there's a lot of potential for the Mets right now in that core group with that rotation. So when we talk about team need for this team and looking at in-house versus external options for them right now, how much of this rotation do you think is something the Mets can bank on heading into 2026?
I weirdly, and guys are probably going to hate hearing me say this, but truthfully, kind of most of it. Like, I think your opening day rotation is almost certain to have McLean, Manaea, Holmes, Peterson. I think Tong is a guaranteed start in the minor leagues. Sproat, you have to prove in spring training. At Kodai Senga, I'm not really in the business of expecting anything from him at this point. I have to kind of see it to believe it. I think there's just basically room to bring in one guy either to the middle or the top of it. If they can get a trade going off for a guy at the top, I think that'd be great. Or if they wind up just signing a guy to be in the middle, I think that'd also be suitable. I just think that's where I think there's just a lot of these guys are under contract and ready to go, and a lot of them were hurt or bad last year. But you've kind of made your bet already with the group of pitchers in this team. I don't think there's a lot of room for flexibility at this point, sadly.
I don't think there's a lot of room for flexibility unless they make room. And that's what's going to be really fascinating to see if Stearns goes all hands on deck and says, we're really going to shake this up. Are the Mets going to bite the bullet and maybe even go the lengths of really trying to find a suitor for Sean Manaea? I don't know. It would be crazy if they go down that route, but I'm curious how much does David Stearns look at what went wrong this past year? How much of that is solely on health versus banking on too much on uncertainty? Because when the Mets headed into this past season, we can both agree there was so many question marks as to what we were getting in the rotation. There was quantity, but how much quality was there? There was potential for sure, some high ceilings, but the floors is what had you concerned. And all those floors were hit for the most part, with the exception of maybe one guy, and that was Noel McLean, who no one was expecting to be at all a key starter in this rotation heading into the year, mind you. So I want to talk more about the rotation, especially external options for them, because while I do not think David Stearns is going to be a man to add 3-4 starters this offseason, I fully expect him to land at least one. And that 1-to-2 ratio, I think, will really be indicative on, do they just go for an ace? Do they go for an ace and a back-end guy? Do they trade someone that opens more of a spot for them? Because they have great rookie options. But again, those ceilings are high, but those floors are also most certainly, you got to keep them in the minor leagues. So how much are the Mets going to bank on them is going to be really, really interesting to me. But before we get on to that, everybody, shout out all you guys watching live right now. Hit that like and subscribe on your way in. We're getting closer to wrapping this one up, but we got some more things to talk about. So please make sure to hit those buttons. Check out my great friend James Schiano, not only on X, but also there on his YouTube channel, where he covers all things Major League Baseball. And he's also the co-host there with Mark at the Mets podcast, as many of you guys know by now. Let's get into these donations real quick, and then let's do this jersey giveaway. I said 20 minutes ago we'd do it, so we might as well do it now. We're almost at 100 likes too, so thank you guys kindly for that. We got here in the chat, let's get to the donations here. Mario, thank you so much, Mario. I appreciate it. Mario, he's been a longtime follower here, and he is an active worker at Citi Field, so he's an absolute beauty and attended Wardy Day. Love him. And he says, sister's successful brain surgery to remove the non-cancerous tumor. That's fantastic. Congratulations, my guy. Please wish your family the best from me. So happy to hear that, first and foremost. That is awesome. Really, really good news, obviously. Big news, to say the least. Legit biggest stub of the year, looking at the pitching. Are there any other key areas of need you see for this team? And two, how do you anticipate them to address it?
I mean, Bullpen badly. Like as going into next season, the only players that are officially under contract right now are none of the guys in this bullpen, and we do assume
Correct.
that we get Mentor back in the player option, we get Brooks Raley back in the club option, that Edwin Diaz, hopefully we agree to a long-term contract. We have Dylan Ross, who came up at the end of the season, didn't see him yet. We still have Brazoban under contract as well, and I think we're definitely going to see Ryan Lambert this season, which I'm very excited about, and we also probably get Drew Smith back, which is, again, that's the beginning of a bullpen. I won't say it's like a great bullpen or even a good bullpen, but that's the beginning of a bullpen. I just think that you're going to have to let David Stearns figure this one out, find a way to do it, because just those guys right there, those relievers that make some real money. And I don't know how much they're going to jump out and go get another like high profile, big money reliever. Maybe this possible, maybe it's not. I'm not really sure yet, but I think the bullpen's going to kind of take a lot of magic again this season, which I don't know. I'm choosing to be confident in that, but I still think it's going to be a big lift.
I think it's going to be a big lift, but if there's one thing I hope David Stearns learned from this past year, it's that you simply cannot rely on as much uncertainty as he did. You know, to throw out 47 pitchers and counting, I know a lot of it had to do with the injuries, but
it came back to the rotation.
Yep, but Stearns is one of these guys that not only do we need a length from the rotation, because to your point exactly, the Mets had, I believe, either the most innings pitched by their bullpen in like all the second half, or second to most in baseball, and fewest by their starters. So that lack of length, not getting guys to go really beyond 4.2 innings or top 5 innings, that certainly killed this team throughout the stretch of the year. So hopefully the Mets can get length. That's a very important thing. But from the relievers, we're going to need to see some consistency. And there are an abundance of options of notable arms in the free agent market, but I don't think the Mets are going to overspend on any reliever outside of Edwin Diaz. I think Diaz is the only exception for them to really do that. I think, honestly, there's a greater role where the Mets get creative and trade for some names of club control guys that you don't necessarily know, or maybe ones that are good, but have just been under the radar because they've been thriving with a team that hasn't been so good. And there is an abundance of guys out there that fit that category. But when we look at the free agent market right now out of relievers, is there anyone that sticks out like a sore thumb to you as like the Mets would be silly not to at least entertain this?
This is going to be a funny answer. I love Hunter Harvey. I have for years. I think he has good stuff, a good fastball.
Mets got close to landing him.
Yeah, 2 really good seasons coming into this one. Dealt with some injuries, came back for the last few weeks and pitched very well for the Royals. I think, though, he's going to be maybe this year's reliever become a star of the project. I think that could wind up being like a big thing going on this offseason. So it's going to happen to somebody. Maybe it's Luke Weaver converting back to a starter's role with the pitches that he's developed in the Yankees bullpen, but Harvey has a splitter. He's got a curveball. He has a slider. He's comfortable throwing all of them, especially to left-handed batters, not the slider, but the splitter and the curveball at least. He has an array of weapons. I think even as reliever, I would like to get him as a starter. I like Danny Coulomb and Caleb Thielbar, but we have 2 lefties bullpen now. Chris Martin is 40 years old, but he's just never stopped pitching well. I think that, let's see some other names out there. I mean,
Danny would be sick. I just think, would we have too much of a good thing when it comes to like good medium to soft tossing lefties? I think that's where we'd be at, right?
I think so too. And it's like you're going to have to kind of, again, figure things out. Like someone who's been terrible forever, Ryan Baruchi, but he has a live arm. Like maybe you give him nothing. Same with John Brebbia, terrible but has a live arm. Like I think
John Brebbia is better than people make him out to be. I think that there's untapped potential there still.
Jonathan Loizaga has been bad, and he has a club option. Who knows?
And the Mets desperately wanted him last offseason. It fell.
Yeah, Eric Swanson, who had a really quick decline the last few years after going from Seattle to Toronto, but has had success in the past. I just think, like other years, especially if you lock down Edwin Diaz at the top, that changes things, of course. If you lose Diaz, I think that a lot more money gets spread around. But if one of your relievers is make $20 million, that kind of takes up a lot of the bullpen budget that you would have. I also think that we're going to see some more interesting in-house options. Like I think someone that got some hype and publicity during the mid part of the season, Felipe De La Cruz, another lefty.
Dude, I'm so glad you brought him up. I think I'm the only person on the planet that made a video on him this year. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think he might profile as a reliever, though, because it's kind of just a fastball, like big loopy slider thing, and he has to be added to the 40-man roster because he's Rule 5 eligible. So I think that's someone where you just can kind of see something like that. Same with another guy, Douglas Orellana. He has some stuff, and I think that he has to be added to the 40-man roster if you keep him around. So you're probably going to see some option. We got also Adbert Alzolay, who was signed last year. He rehabbed this whole season.
He was looking good not long ago in his
year.
bullpens I saw. Yep.
Yeah, so, and then again, I mentioned before Ryan Lambert, Dylan Rossick. I think you're going to see the beginning of the pitching machine come to fruition this year and actually get some of these prospects being converted to major league talents. Like we see a lot of these other successful teams through the playoffs. Like you watch the Brewers parade an entire bullpen of guys you've never heard of in your life, all of them self-developed and all of them nasty. Like that's the goal, because you don't want to be spending this money on relievers every year because they're so chaotic, and you give one of them $11 million like AJ Minter and he tears his lat in the second week of the season, and you just blew that entire investment, and then your whole bullpen's kind of playing catch up the entire season. So I think that you'll again see more creativity. Don't know if you Mets fans want to hear that or want to see that, but that's definitely what we're going to get once again.
But the difference between years past versus now is that the Mets actually have a farm to justify doing this. And what you saw them not only succeed with in St. Lucie, but with the Cyclones, and most certainly the Roma Ponies in AAA, is telling of what we will hopefully see more at the major league level. I mean, Ross got the call right at the very end. I saw him in person this year. He looked electric. Orlana, not so much. He just had a lot of struggles transitioning to AAA that we saw this year. I'm curious to see how he looks to begin next season. Felipe de la Cruz was a really interesting one because he cruised, no pun intended, through AA, and then once he got the call to AAA, was looking fantastic again as a starter, and he's really a two-pitch pitcher. But then when they put him in that role now as a reliever, it just didn't work for whatever reason. He was very underwhelming when he first was utilized as a reliever there, and they were trying to make it work, but it just wasn't working. So if Cruz can get himself figured out as a reliever, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I think he's probably the only true lefty option right now that we could see up as soon as next year. That's a flame-throwing lefty option for the bullpen. Beyond that, the Mets really don't have much of that in their farm that I could think of that would profile better as a reliever than, say, a starter currently.
No, I do think they want to develop these guys as starters for as long as they possibly can, because it's just you get more value for guys as starters. It's kind of the Clay Holmes discussion. Like he was too good of a starter to move back to the bullpen. Like you kind of just have to keep that rolling.
No, you're right, and I think the Mets are not only going to defer a lot in house with the pitching, but naturally they are going to go after some guys. And Hunter Harvey, I 1,000% agree, is a guy that will be very much on their radar. No name. We did the giveaway already. Maybe you didn't figure that out, or maybe your stream's paused. I'm not entirely sure. But let's calm down. We're going to put you in timeout, and then we'll see if you can. You'll be able to come back in. So as we continue, let's talk about the fact that Hunter Harvey was a guy who the Mets almost landed at this past year's winter beatings. According to Pat Ragazzo, had reported how there was negotiations between the Mets and Starling Marte for Hunter Harvey, but they fell through. And Harvey was a guy who I honestly viewed as kind of like a higher upside Ryan Stanek, and that was at the time before the Mets were bringing back Stanek. So it actually would have made a lot of sense if that was essentially the role he was going to be put in. So Harvey, I think, checks off a lot of boxes. I also think another arm that if the Mets are going to go down the route of some notable names, but not names that necessarily you're going to have to spend like a complete bag on. I'm curious not only in Jonathan Elizoka, given the fact that he's got that club option, but even Kyle Finnegan has been a name that's kind of circulated in Mets land the past couple of years. They know him very well during his time with the Nationals. He's still looking very good. Beyond Finnegan, you have top dogs there. David Robertson I would love, but if we're going to be honest, is Robertson practical for health reasons? I'm not entirely sure as he's entering his age 41 season. Looking beyond that, I'm honestly happy that I'm not looking at these names and like, oh my God, we have to get so-and-so and this and this and that. Like there's some fun names out here, but
Diaz
no one
is back. So
yeah, you have to get Diaz back. That goes without saying. But beyond that though, the Mets can get very creative, and I think that they are going to get very creative. And to your point earlier about how you don't want to spend big on relievers, look no further than really the Houston Astros from 2 years ago with Ryan Stanek, Phil Maton, and Hector Neris. All three of them flopped with those teams that same year. Neris got like a $8 million AAV or so, and he was DFA'd at one point by the Cubs that year. Then you saw Stanek get dumped to the Mets halfway through from Seattle, and Maton essentially get dumped to the Mets as well from Tampa Bay. So it's just one of those things. What guys do in one organization is not necessarily locked that'll happen elsewhere. So just something to bear in mind as we evaluate talent in the offseason. Names are names, and they're great. A lot of great talent, but doesn't mean it's a lock because we know how fickle these relievers can be.
Think about the Dodgers, too, from this past offseason. Huge money to Tanner Scott, decent money to Kirby Yates, Made the big trade at the deadline for Brock Stewart. Same thing last year, Michael Kopech. Helped him last year, but absent this year. All of those guys right now are kind of unpitchable for them as they go through this run. Like, they're relying on Roki Sasaki, who was unpitchable 2 months ago, and Alex Vesia, who I can't even believe how often they turn to him. But it's just it becomes all hands on deck, and there's really no guarantee that you give a reliever money. I mean, we just learned this with Ryan Helsley. The Mets acquired Ryan Helsley at the deadline. In the last 4 years, he's one of the 5 best relievers in all of baseball, and he can't even pitch all of a sudden. That's just how
crazy.
relievers work. So it's probably just more prudent to kind of let that stuff come together, more like get a lot of quantity and hope some of it turns into quality.
Speaking of quality, there's some quality starters out there. Not an abundance of them, but there are some that really stick out on the board right now. And it's headlined by Framber Valdez, multi-time World Series champ with the Houston Astros. You have Shota Imanaga, who has a club option, so I'm not really talking about him. Freddie Peralta is not going to be a free agent because his club option will be picked up, but solid chance he could be traded if the Brewers continue the philosophy of how they've been in recent years, if they want to go all in with him or if they want to maximize on his trade value in the final year of his contract. Ranger Suarez is coming off of another fantastic year with the Philadelphia Phillies, and you look at Dylan Cease, who's been connected to the Mets plenty each of the past 2.5 seasons. You also look at some other key names here. You know, even though I wouldn't see him landing with the Mets because he's not a big market guy, Merrill Kelly, Chris Bassett, Seabass, coming off of a solid year with Toronto. He's not getting any younger, but he still has been reliable to a degree that we have seen. You know, there's a plethora of, kind of mid-level guys out there in the free agent market, but then it kind of really starts to die off on, more reclamation projects, if you will. And I don't know if that's really something that not only Stearns wants to do, but rather what us fans want to see him do after what went wrong for the rotation this year, James. It goes without saying, but we need more certainty in this rotation. And when looking at, do the Mets need an ace or not, do you think the Mets have what they may be looking for out there right now in the free agent or trade market?
Truthfully, no. I think that the pitching available this offseason is objectively kind of not very good. Like, unless you make a huge swing for either Joe Ryan, Pablo Lopez, or Sandy Alcantara, you kind of are stuck kind of with these guys who probably aren't that much better than what we have. Like, think about the names you just mentioned. Like, how many of them do you think are going to be better than Sean Manaea next year? Like, you paid Sean Manaea to be the middle rotations innings either guy that can like pitch like a 3 but elevate himself to a 2. Like, that's what that contract says about him. David Peterson, we've seen him get his way up to being like a 2, but then sometimes it looks more like a 5. What version of him do you get? I think that we kind of have learned, again, we cannot rely on Kodai Senga, so he's kind of might be the 6th starter when we begin the season. Clay Holmes is a very consistent 4, it seems like. I don't think you get much more or much less than that. And I think Nolan McLean, again, is someone that can probably pitch like a 1. You probably more want to rely on him as a 2, but I think the biggest thing for this Mets team is getting some innings. And, like, it's hard to say any innings are certain because anyone could get hurt at any given moment. Corbin Burns was the most certain thing in the league for the last 5 years. This year he got hurt and he kind of torpedoed the entire Diamondback season. Like, Dylan Cease, I don't know how effective he's going to be, but he's always out there. But if he's not out there, then what are you paying for? Like, it's a weird market for starting pitching this offseason. I kind of also get worried that without the top dog available on the market, all of these mid-class starting pitchers then get paid more like top dogs. And all of a sudden now every single deal looks bad, and then you kind of wind up playing catch-up and you're on tilt. And that's not really a fun spot for a team or an executive to be.
No, it's not. And we know how expensive pitching has been in recent years, which is why, begs the question, do the Mets consider trading a Senga or a Peterson, for example, because we know the value is going to be so up and down in the market, and we know there is a world where maybe the Mets can open up some of those rotation spots by maximizing more quality now. Now, the big concern when evaluating the free agent options, I think, is really how much are they demanding term-wise? Because Framber Valdez has to look at what Max Fried got and says, well, I'm probably not going to get 8 years, but I'm going to do everything in my power to get obviously as much of a long-term bag as I can. Even me entering my age 32 season or so, because Valdez fits the mold of what you're looking for, and that is a guy who will be a horse in the innings for you. Every single season, Valdez has been giving 170, 180 plus innings. So say what you will about some of the inconsistencies we saw this year and maybe him getting his, what's in a twist there with his catcher. He still is a guy that's going to be able to go out there and be an effective, at least middle of the rotation, quality southpaw in your rotation. For me, for Valdez, my big concern is honestly health in the second half of his career, especially if you had all invest in him. He really gives me the vibes of a guy in similarity to Montas, where I feel like his health is going to quickly deteriorate unless he's really keeping up with himself. I genuinely don't know. Valdez surprises me in a way that J-Ram surprises me. Like, J-Ram doesn't come off as a guy that's as fast as he is or as athletic as he is, but he's one of the best, if not the best, third baseman in the game today. And that's kind of how I feel with Valdez when I watch him on the mound. You know, he's not a guy that I'm expecting to go out and dominate, and then he's going out there and shoving, and he's getting close to getting no-nos or whatever the case may be. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen with Framber. I do not think he's a guy that the Mets have necessarily at the tippity top of their list, but if you're looking at who's going to give you immediate innings and who can provide a clear area of need for the Mets in that regard that the Mets would just have to pay for, I don't think anyone checks off a box better right now in the free agent market than what you would get right now in Valdez. Is that fair to say?
I think it's very fair, but then do you trust Framber Valdez to give him $200 million over like 7 seasons? Because I don't know if I want 36-year-old Framber Valdez on this team. I think that you might be able to get everything that you just said if you just give Dylan Cease a 2-year deal. Like, it might be that he might be better than Framber Valdez over the next 2 years.
And that's
he might be much
okay
worse,
as well.
but yeah, like, I think that I think they're going to be very afraid of giving out this massive long-term deal to a player that's not considered super elite. Like, I think Framber gets a 6, 7, possibly 8-year deal somewhere, kind of similar to Max Fried. And I do not think the Mets are the team to dole that out.
Yeah, the Mets do not feel at all like a team that's going to give it now entering age 32 season, you know, a 5+ year deal for a starter. But is that where they can get creative and sway Valdez to kind of somehow, some way fall in the category of the Verlander Scherzer route, but a little bit younger, by throwing absurdly high AAV with player opt-outs, knowing that, yes, with the pending CBA, that might not be the most beneficial for him from that standpoint. But if he's really looking for immediate dollars and just player control and contract, that could be a feasible route. I'm curious to see how far the Mets go with any of these key free agent names, or are we solely talking the Freddie Peraltas, the Sandy Alcantaras, the Edward Cabreras, the going down the list here of the Joe Ryans and the Pablo Lopez's, who I think honestly might be one of the best options for the Mets to consider when evaluating trades. Pablo Lopez only has 2 more years left of control. He's coming off of, you know, a second half injury plagued year for him, but a guy who I thought, if he wasn't injured, was a clear trade candidate for the Mets to consider. And we saw the Twins have their fire sale at the trade deadline. They would love nothing more than to shed that payroll right now for a team that clearly is not going to be going anywhere more than likely in 2026, at least not to the liking of where Twins fans want them to be. So Lopez, not only a guy who understands the NL East well, understands the Mets well. We beaten him up plenty, funny enough, at Citi Field, even, mind you, but he's had a lot of success that we've seen in this division against these rivals. And this is the kind of starter on the kind of club control of a contract that I think is a perfect middle for what the Mets would be looking for, knowing that they can't get the Yamamotos that they were longing for 2 years ago at the age of 25 to lock down long term. If you can get a guy getting closer to 30, but you don't have to lock down for 5 to 7 years, I think that's a win with the amount of upside that someone like Lopez has. Outside of Lopez, is there anyone else there in the trade market that you think is like, all right, yeah, this is a guy that the Mets should really consider unloading just a haul of prospects for?
I don't know about the Hall of Prospects, but I will put my stamp of approval on the guy I would really hope the Mets would trade for this season to be Edward Cabrera of the Marlins.
Yep.
It's a live arm. It's a guy who sits 97.
He's
with
nasty.
A plethora of off-speed pitches. We know, we saw it the last day of the season. He should really shut us down. But he's someone that feels like they're ascending, that you'll still be able to get while they're on their rookie contract, a few years of team control. He's someone that you might not even have to give up as much as Joe Ryan or Pablo Lopez. And 3 years from now, he still could be as good as those guys. Like, he's someone that if the Marlins wind up dumping Sandy, which I don't know if they will, because Peter Bendix came out the other day in his postseason press conference that they expect his team to compete for a playoff spot next year. So maybe all these guys stick around.
Right.
But if there was someone to be on the move that I think can be a real difference maker and actually ascend to being a frontline starter that might not cost that much right now, it is Edward Cabrera.
I agree with that. Cabrera is someone who I've been loving the idea of acquiring the past year. I know he's a little wild thing when he first came out, but he's really settled down this year, especially had another, quality season for Cabrera. Now, to the point, if you look at the Marlins, who were, all rah-rah about making sure the Mets didn't make playoffs, one begs the question, why would they trade with the Mets? But at the same time, if Peter Bendix doesn't have this now absurd bias, which would have started this season, I'm led to believe that it's all going to come down to who is going to be the best suitor for the Marlins. And listen, for one reason or another, whether you think it was right or wrong, and I certainly thought it was wrong, then I stand by that. He thought that trading Jesus Luzardo to the Phillies was a good thing. So if they're going to go out of their way to do that in division, I'm inclined to believe that the Marlins do have a level of an appetite to do that again at the right price. And the Mets do have an abundance of not only starting pitching talent in the farm of guys that we didn't even talk about. We're looking at the Jonathan Santucci's, the R.J. Gordons, the Will Watsons, the Jack Wenigers. The list goes on and on of looking at guys that are going to be moving up to AAA eventually next season, that are going to be the next, crop of top pitching prospects for this team once this current top four blossoms. That scenario, we could see the Mets really dabble in and trade away some pieces, which I'm fine with. I just want to make sure that if the Mets do something of that significance in the division, that they make sure that it is something that most certainly benefits them, that they will either win the trade or at worst have a win-win scenario here, because the Marlins, as we all saw this year, are not at all far from contending. And if they get this right, next man up mentality going with this team, then they may continue surprise and find themselves at least in that wild card discussion next season.
I think they hope to be. So again, we don't really know if this is something that could happen, but I would like to see if it can. Because the Twins also, just because how bad the AL Central is, are kind of in that boat as well. Like if they keep Pablo and Joe Ryan, they're both healthy, they can easily be a 500 team. Like their lineup isn't good, but also they have 3 or 4 guys at the top. They're going to have a big infusion of talent next year from the minors. There's something, I don't know if these teams are going to trade. And like kind of what we're talking about here, teams don't really trade pitching. It just doesn't happen. That's kind of it. So you don't trade pitching when you have it. So
Right.
if you even think you might get kind of remotely, even a little bit close to competing, you're just not giving up a guy who you think is going to give you innings.
Exactly, because we've seen how many teams think that they have an abundance of depth, and then bam, before you know it, 4 starters are down, kind of like what happened to the Mets this year. So if we're going to take any page out of playbook, that is one that I'd anticipate that we're going to see teams be wary of moving forward. But everyone has a price. At the Mets and David Stearns to really go out there and be aggressive, for all we know, they may do some very surprising things this offseason. My best take would be, if now that Mike Rizzo's out of town, all right, there's no more bias, let's go ahead and get Mackenzie Gore. Do whatever it takes. I don't care. Like, that's a starter, for example, that I think checks off every box for an ace upside starter, controllable, and right around his mid-20s. Not a guy that's at all at the point where you think it's not a worthy long-term investment. I think it's the opposite with someone like him. So to wrap this up, let's get into the final area of potential need, and that's aspects of the offense. Listen, Pete Alonso, we want to return, that's for sure. But outside of Alonso, there are some really interesting names out there in both the trade and free agent market. And right away in the free agent market, I talked about some of these guys in my video a couple days ago. Look at Cody Bellinger, Trent Grisham. What do these guys have in common? They're 3 outs away from being bounced in the ALDS. And should that be the case, they're going to be free agents, which means that the Mets may very well be in the market. And I think both make plenty of sense for the Mets, not necessarily together, but at least one of the two, depending on what Stearns is looking to prioritize. Again, going back to Carson Bench, love Bench. I really think he can crack this team out of camp, but there's still uncertainty there. And I think that uncertainty is significant enough for the Mets to, at minimum, want to add something of semblance there in the outfield beyond the levels of the Tyrone Taylors, for example. Should that be the case, Trent Grisham's coming off of a great career year with the Yankees that we know, 30-plus home runs, loving him. And I think even without the short porch, you look at his splits, he still would have put up, right around, a 25 home run season at Citi Field this year. So it's not like he was completely reliant as to where he was playing for half the season. Cody Bellinger brings the versatility that I think David Stearns would love, especially if Alonso walks. Like, that's a guy who, oh my God, you can have him playing first one night, you can have him playing outfield the next, you can have him at DH if you really wanted. And very creative with Belly, who brings a championship experience, and a guy who's thrived in every big market imaginable. Like, that's a very appealing thing when I look at guys who the Mets could target this offseason. Then you have the obvious one in Kyle Schwarber, who the Mets did not land 4 years ago. Instead, they got Starling Marte. Very similar structured contracts. Little did we know how much of a mistake that was going to be back then. Schwarber's had at least 40 home runs for the most part every single year. Walk year, best season of his career. You can't look at this walk year and expect that every year with Schwarber, but you can expect a minimum of a 40 home run campaign, north of 100 RBIs. He just had the home run
to tie the game against the Dodgers.
Who just had a home run?
Schwarber just had a 460-foot home run, as you said his name.
Holy shit, that's crazy. Wow, yeah. What was it, 1-1?
Yeah, 1-1.
Okay, there we go. I still have the Yanks game on, so I didn't see that. That's bananas. Wow. Okay, yeah. So that's gonna be spicy. And Schwarber's one who north of a 60 home run year would do wonders in this lineup with Soto, with Lindor. I mean, it would be a lefty heavy for sure, especially depending on the uncertainty of Alonso, but you would be finally getting certainty in your DH position because the Mets have been longing for that. And as long as Schwarber isn't asking for like an absurd 7-year contract, if he's looking more in the Anthony Santander range of, absolute worst of term, maybe some player opt-outs in there if that would be more enticing for him, I would be all over it. There are a couple other bats for sure that I would like to see the Mets dabble in, but what's your thoughts on kind of those big three when looking at outfield/DH?
Yeah, I truthfully don't think Schwarber, one, will leave the Phillies. Like, I think he'll just go back. I think they'll wind up paying him and going back there, especially after what looks like could be a pretty disastrous defeat, really, with the Dodgers here. But everything we've heard from David Stearns, kind of like if Pete Alonso's on this team, I don't really think Kyle Schwarber will be as well. Like, I think that they want speed and defense. I think they believe in the power and the way this team can hit. I know it was very inconsistent this year, but it was definitely good enough to be a team that can make noise in the playoffs. The pitching wasn't like the absolute worst in the whole world for 3 straight months. I think that you probably look to re-sign Alonso, and then you probably see if you can just find some kind of right-hander that can maybe play a little bit of second and third and offer some more speed and defense with just enough hitting. Like, I don't think strengthening the lineup is anywhere near the top of David Stern's wish list this offseason. I think it actually truthfully could be totally towards the bottom.
I don't think it's towards the top of the wish list, but I think they're going to be opportunistic as they always are. And I think especially the market of Grisham is going to be a fascinating one to see if a team really gets desperate and overspends there, or if he kind of falls a little bit under the radar and is a guy that a team like the Mets can swoop in and get at a reasonable deal for, especially if he enjoys New York, wants to stay here, but maybe the Yankees just can't run it back. Because I do think there's a role where the Yankees run it back with Bellinger more than I do Grisham currently.
Unless they get Tucker.
Unless they get Tucker. And if they get Tucker, then that changes everything. And Kyle Tucker's a guy that the Mets, I'm sure, will at least call once. I'm sure that they may not do much more than that. But Kyle Tucker's going to be a very fascinating name, given his inconsistencies that he's had with the Cubs this year as well. Fantastic first half, was non-existent in parts second half dealing with ailment. Kyle's a fascinating one, but if the Mets do not go heavy on wanting to add oomph in their lineup and they want to add, say, more versatility, more speed, and that is outside of the Carson Benjes, the Jet Williams of the world, who is someone else externally out there that you think would check off that box for them, or multiple boxes rather?
I maybe someone like, I wonder if they kick the tires on Bo Bichette and be like, you're going to be our second baseman, kind of give him that same type of deal that Marcus Semien, when Semien got a 1-year deal to play with the Blue Jays, ironically, because I don't think he's a shortstop anymore. I think everyone knows that.
He's not a good shortstop,
No, but I think he could be a plenty okay second baseman.
Yep.
I wonder if maybe Eugenio Suarez's market is very soft. He becomes the full-time DH and plays third base when there's a left-handed pitcher on the mound to get Brett Baty a blow, and you get another righty in the lineup if Mark Viento's still on and he's the DH that day. I don't know if the Mets really even look. Again, this is all with Pete Alonso notwithstanding, but I'm very curious, especially if Nimmo comes back as well. Like, I don't know how aggressive they are with any of these position players that are out there this offseason.
Yeah, I don't know either, but that's what makes it for a really fun offseason, because I feel like we're going to be surprised one way or the other. I don't think we're going to have like, oh my God, Steve Cohen just spent $2 billion surprise, but I think we're going to have, there's going to be at least one trade that we're not expecting, and I think we're going to see, of the starters the Mets consider, I bet there's going to be at least 2 or 3 names thrown down that ring that we haven't even thought of. Like, oh, him? Like, not that you're mad at it. You're just like, oh, kind of the way that some people react when you hear like Mitch Keller's name, for example, because that isn't the first person you're thinking when you're thinking of like adding a starter, someone more small market, on a fringe team along those lines. But, this is going to be a really exciting offseason for David Stearns and the Mets. Now David, for the first time as team president, actually having pressure on his back a little bit, which now adds pressure and the leash to Carlos Mendoza, and is going to make for a really eventful next couple weeks. Once playoffs are officially concluded, we'll find out what they do with his coaching staff. That there's a lot of different aspects of this team that really could be changing, or we could be sitting here a couple months from now talking as we get into late February and like, wow, we're actually running it back. We're really doing this. Okay. All right. That's great. So before I let you go, James, I guess final remarks regarding this team as we head into what's going to be a very hectic offseason.
Yeah, dude. I'm excited for it. I kind of think this team either this is gonna be a cop out answer, like I love to give, but I think it either looks largely the same or completely unrecognizably different. So
No in between.
yeah, literally no in between. So I'm excited to see what happens. I really hope we can see David Stearns get creative, and I do think that I know he lost a lot of good faith this year, but I caution Mets fans to maybe at least hope if we get throw one decent pitcher into this mix. I think this rotation can just with a little bit of good luck compared to bad luck be a lot different. Like play, perform, produce a lot differently next year.
Oh, 100%. Big with the $2 donation. What do you guys think of anyone from Japan? I don't really have anyone other than Murakami that I'm like overly analyzing right now. That'll be happening shortly, because
Yeah,
you know
that's
how
next
this
month.
works. You know, you're going to hear about guys, you're going to see through trade rumors, etc., that, oh, so-and-so is now expected to be posted. And he's like this insane southpaw starter that you never heard of that has a sub-2 ERA for the past 6-7 years in the NPB. Or it's going to be this another versatile infielder that looks like a guy who could be, a contact cane again. You're going to have those happen. But from James Schiano, co-host of the Mets Hub podcast and his own YouTube channel at James Schiano, this is your guy, Wardy. Thank you guys so much again for watching for our offseason outlook, and we look forward to chopping up with you guys on all things Mets here real soon. James, thanks so much for joining. I appreciate it.
Of course, Warrior loving. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night. We'll talk